Okay, what's up, man? We're working on some fun context stuff today using hooks. I have some of my favorite Font Awesome stuff installed, like you've used their Font Awesome icons. They're badass, especially the SVG icons are really cool. And I have the React Font Awesome library in case we have to use that Font Awesome component. React DOM, React Script, something magical there. We don't need any of the dependencies. I have something called Bulma installed, which is another CSS framework for you to check out. I do like Bootstrap, but I think Bulma is actually fairly cool as well. It actually has less class names overall, but it has like unopinionated components. There's not a specific thing that something should look like according to them. Like they just provide you like very lightweight and typical like modern web design utilities like heroes and layouts and levels and cards and layers and stuff like that. So we're going to be using that to build up our app here. And here's going to be our intended goal. We're going to have an app that will not have to pass props or state along anywhere. We're going to have one context component that can maintain everything for our state just inside of this app render right here. So we're going to need to render two components, a track list and some kind of player controls, and that's going to be wrapped in some kind of context provider that will provide context to the track list and the player controls. The player controls component, you can hit the left and right arrows, and we should be toggling in the track list as well. We should hit a play button in the track list, and the controls beneath should automatically load and have like a little marquee saying what are we playing here. And you'll get to see, if you haven't messed with it before, the audio object in JavaScript that we can provide and create an audio object that plays in our HTML. So ultimately, I want to have some kind of class in here of container. So guess what? Bulma also has a container. So we can do main.container as always. And inside of here, I will ultimately want some kind of track list component. And I'll ultimately also want some kind of player controls component. So player controls is going to be a self-contained component like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just prepare my import statements for them. We'll say import track list from something that currently doesn't exist. So let's go to components / track list, and we'll also have one for our player controls. So player controls from components / players controls, players control or player control. That makes more sense. Let's do that. There we go. Okay, so now that I have those two set up here, eventually we're going to need some context as well, which we'll be importing right above that. Well, the import statements don't really matter in their order. I don't know. I like the context and my components doesn't matter. So I have some assets here, including some MP3 files, including one that you recommended to me as well, Bolshe Waltz. Funky stuff. I like it. And we're going to be using those MP3 files as our assets. I just had a YouTube MP3 downloader extension real quick. So the quality is not the best. There's also some, like, a couple seconds of downtime at the start of every single MP3, but it is what it is just for demo purposes. So a new folder for components. And I'm going to make one called util, since that's one of my favorite things to do, where I nest my utility functions. For example, any kind of context music player we're about to be writing here is going to be a utility file that's going to exist inside of there. So that's where we're going to be writing our context. So we should probably start, somewhere there. Let's start with the context. So if we write some kind of context called useMusicPlayer.js. And I'm writing this in JavaScript because I'm lazy to generate a TypeScript component file of some kind with boilerplate. So we're going to be using, most importantly from the React library, we're going to be using the useContext. No, don't autocomplete that. useContext from the React library because that's what we care about in this particular demo. And we're also going to have to generate some context for this particular guy as well, which will be a component. But let's go ahead and start writing our basics. So we can say const useMusicPlayer will require no arguments, and it's going to do some fantastic code for us here. And we are going to also prepare and export this guy for use. So we're going to do an export default useMusicPlayer, and it's going to be using the context. So what I want to have end up happening here is some kind of const, and we'll call it even state and set state just to keep it really simple, and you can always come back here and name them whatever you want with ES6 shorthand. Constant state and set state, and we need to be able to use the context of something. So if I say use context, we need to provide it some kind of context, right? So that's going to be kind of like our initial state that will generate all these bits of information for us. What we need to do now is we need to actually create this context, and it's going to be actually like the context provider. So I would actually call that a component that will be used in this utility file. So I'm going to make my first component, and we're going to call it music player context.js. And inside this context player.js, this is where we're actually going to be managing state and React components. So we can say React and useState are going to be my two imports from the React library. I'm also going to want to eventually import our file. So, I can go ahead and set those up now. So I can import Africa by Toto from up1 directory assets, and I think I had Africa lowercase a.mp3. Africa by Toto mp3. We're going to import the file for Bolshi Waltz, so we'll call it Bolshi Waltz from up1 assets. Bolshi, just making sure I'm not making typos in the interest of time here. .mp3, and this is a Webpack feature that knows what these import statements mean and how to connect the paths to a variable name, which is very useful. And I have a song called Starlight Brigade by Tupperware Remix Party that I like a whole lot as well. From up1 assets Starlight Brigade .mp3, except I didn't call it that. I called it, I should have just camel cased it just to make my life easy, but no, I had to make it complicated. So they're my assets, the three assets that this music player is gonna take for us here. So then from there, we need to actually create our context. So we can call it whatever we want, but more importantly, I'm gonna call it music player context is going to be equal to react.create context. And I hear my cats fussing in the background, I swear to God. So the interesting thing about create context is it needs to have it needs to be initially blank values of whatever our context is going to be. My context in this case will be some object, and it also will have some setter on that object. So that kind of sounds like what our useState array returns. So rather than just having a blank object as our initial context, which a lot of new people to create context do, I'm going to pass an array of two values. First off, it's going to be whatever my state object looks like. Secondly, it'll be whatever my setter function ends up looking like. So now this context we're going to be providing here will make more sense when I finally go to return a value for this context. So it's going to make more sense here in a second. So what we need to do is now create our provider. So I'm going to say my music player provider will be a function that if it has any props, we can render them and we can use them in some form or fashion. Otherwise, it's going to maintain its own local state and set state. And that will be coming from useState. And here's where our initial state value will be a big, fancy, complicated object that will be messed with here. So what I'm going to be doing now is go ahead and come down yonder and write some stuff here. So we're going to have a piece of state called state.audioPlayer, and that audio player is going to be a new capital A audio object, which is how we're going to be making this particular music player work. And this is where we can say audio.play and .start and stop and stuff like that. We're going to have a list of tracks, which will be nested inside of an array of some kind. As you can imagine, they're going to be an array of objects that will have a name property that will be a string along with a file that is associated with. So for the first one, it will be Africa, or actually, let's do a Toto Africa, and the file will be referencing the Africa import that Webpack can handle for us with the file paths. The next one will be, let's do yours, which was, oh, I already forgot the name of it, even though I wrote down just the song. Looking at our DMs here. Spoonbill, name. Yeah. It'll be, stop, Spoon, Bill, song, Bolshi Waltz, file, Bolshi Waltz. Okay, and then we have one final file here where we're going to have, stop, my God, okay. Tupperware, we're going to call it Tupperware Remix Party, or TWRP is what they're actually called, and the song is Starlight Brigade. And I'm doing these names here because these are going to be the names that are going to be scrolling a little marquee in our music player controls. So now that I have my track list, we can come to here and add as many as we want. We can get fancier with array maps and stuff like that, but I'm going to call it a day for here. We're going to have another property sibling to the tracks that's going to be, is this song currently playing or not? So we're going to start that as false. So if is playing is false. And another initial value of, we're going to need to know what our current track index is. So we can do current track index, and we're going to start that at null because nothing should be playing initially. So we're not even going to do a 0 on there. So this is our initial state, right? You probably haven't done a lot of initial states like this, but this is like the context for my whole app's initial state. And we can always come update it here, and the whole thing should automatically update as well. So what we're going to be doing here is from the music player provider, it needs to return a couple lines of code, and it's going to be some React stuff here where we're going to say, okay, music player context is what's created from React.createContext has something on it called a .provider. And this provider can wrap any kind of children, so that's why I had to have props at the top saying whatever this provider is wrapping, aka our track list and our player controls, it can provide some values that can be accessible in those child components. And so I'll be providing a value for this guy that will be an array, if you see where this is now coming from, right? The create context will be an array with our state object, aka our initial state right here, aka this object, and now a setter function to update that state, aka this set state. That way, this component provider can maintain its own state that can dole out to children to make them trigger re-renders at the same time. Now, that functionality, keep in mind, can sometimes backfire because maybe this guy sets a state and it updates all of its children when you want it to update only one child. But that's a more advanced subject for a different time when it comes to why did my set state trigger a re-render in a component that technically doesn't have anything re-rendering inside of it. Fun concept in React where you have to figure out where the hell this set state's firing and why it's causing a child component to update when it shouldn't. Good times, let me tell you. So now that I got all this ready, we can actually go back to our, if I'm not mistaken, our app.jsx, and I can actually provide, or I can have this music player provider function, or this component now actually rendering in my app. So let's go ahead and import from that file, music player provider. Hold on, I think I forgot to export some things. Yeah, might want to do that, buddy, right? I mean, that could be kind of useful where I actually, I don't know, export these particular things so I can actually use them across my app. And I'm going to actually do them as a named export of music player context where I need it and music player provider where I need the component instead. So with those two exports ready to go, I can come back to my app like I originally wanted to and say, okay, here is where the provider needs to render, because the provider can provide context to any child components. Music player provider from this directory /components, music player context where we can render around our container, because I want everything inside of it to have access to the context, where I can have my provider wrapping all of my code. So now, whenever I finish coding up, are y'all serious? God, my cats are like running around and fighting. If I have to pause this video, oof, I swear, someone's gonna get a boogie beat down. Y'all better calm down. This is gonna be the most jank recording ever, but yeah, that's part of the fun, right? So now whenever I code my track list and player controls, they should be able to hook in or consume the context of the provider and be able to render their own state being provided by a parent context component without having to pass any props around this thing at all. So what we can do from there now, I think, is actually begin coding out our... We can work on... What can we work on, actually? Let's work it back on our utility. So like our use music player. I probably should have started with the context and worked my way backwards, but trying to make this before my 2 o'clock webinar meeting. I'm trying to go do this in a rush and do this in a one take, which is why I'm not cutting out my cats fighting. So now that we're back here, this is actually going to get kind of gnarly pretty fast. So if I'm going to be using a context, we have to know which context we're using, which is what I subsequently and conveniently exported from my provider, right? The context of the initial state. Boom. So now I can hook into the values that the context had, which was state and set state. Hence where this context of state and set state comes from, where I can say, okay, bring in the context of this thing, or whatever it is, which happens to return a state and set state, so I can use this destructuring technique again, so it almost looks like we're doing a use state, but we're not. We're doing it via a provider of some kind. So from here, I could write arrow functions, but I'll have to be very careful on their positioning, as const arrow functions or let arrow functions are not hoisted. So I'm actually going to just be using the traditional function keyword to make sure that whatever order I write these functions in, hoisting won't be a problem. They can be referencing each other. They can be exporting each other. There's not one they'll have to reference another, so I have to compose like their order. I'm just going to be lazy and just give them names with the keyword of function. So we need to have one for playing each individual track, don't we? That way when we click a button, it should play a track. So we're going to say, in this case, it should be called with some kind of index, because our track list or our player should know which track we're currently on based on its index inside of the array. So when we call this function play track, it will be called with some kind of index value. And I will have to say that if the index is currently what's playing, so from our state, it had a current track index, conveniently, that I also had on there. At least I thought that's what I called it. Thank you, IntelliSense, for not helping me. Yeah, current track index. Well, if the current track index state.currentTrackIndex is the same of whatever index this play track got called with. That means this should toggle the song on and off. So I don't have a function for this yet, but I'm going to have a function called toggle play, meaning if I clicked on the play button on something that's already playing, it should just stop itself, right? It shouldn't restart the song. It should go pause. Otherwise, we need to do a couple of things. We need to say state.audioPlayer .pause, right? So if I can learn to type audio player, and that comes from our context, once again, of our audio player object. It has a method on it called pause, because I need to pause the current song. I need to create a new audio player, so we're going to say state.audioPlayer is going to be assigned a new audio object with the new song we want to play. So that's where I'm going to say state at tracks at position, the index, and we use the .file property inside of that. So we're going to make a new audio object from our state we're getting from the context, from the list of tracks with the index we have clicked on play for, and it should load the .file into our new audio object. And then ultimately it needs to actually play the song, so we can say state.audioPlayer.play should play the new song that we have selected. And I also need to call a setState where we're going to update our state value. So I'm going to say our previous state needs to be a new implicit return and state object of everything to maintain state, but we have to update our current track index to be the index that we've now playing, and we have to select is playing to true, right? So we have to say if the current track is playing, just pause it. We haven't written that function yet, though, so we can do that here in a second. So function toggle play. This is why also I didn't want to write const everywhere, because I have to make sure all these things are ordered correctly. Otherwise, we need to pause the current song, make a new audio object with the song we want to play, start playing that song, and update our state to reflect that, saying this is playing, this is the new index, and then maintain the rest of our state so we don't override something by mistake. So toggle play shouldn't be too bad. We're going to have a fun little if-else statement here that says our condition will be if state.isPlaying is currently true, then I need to pause the audio player. So state.audioPlayer.pause. And thank you IntelliSense for finally knowing what the hell we're trying to do here. Otherwise, we need to play the current song, aka state.audioPlayer.play. So this will be like the play or pause button, essentially. That's all this guy boils down to. And regardless of what condition happens, we're always going to have to call our buddy the setState to update some values, where I'm going to have state, and we're going to have a new state object. What have I done messed up? Ron. No. Take our previous state, and we're going to update it to maintain, as always, using spread state. And we're going to update the value of state is playing. So is playing is going to be whatever the current state is, or the opposite of it. So toggle that Boolean back and forth on each button press of toggle play. Now the next two that are going to be kind of some fun here, some fun magic. I had to show a student how this could work when you're toggling through stuff and you want to reset through the array positions as you're toggling through items. We need to have one for our play previous track. There's a function that does some stuff, and we want one for play next track. So function play next track. And they're going to be similar but different, and I'm sure you can find out funky algorithms of how you want to do this. We have to generate a new index as we're playing the next previous track or the next track. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to grab our state.currentTrackIndex, and I want to add a -1 to it or subtract 1, whatever you really want to do. I've always thought about it this way personally. Whatever that results in, I want to find the remainder of that and state.tracks.length for my array of tracks. And I also want to add the state.tracks.length to it as well. That makes I can hopefully be, and no, this is not right. We have to this be plus minus 1 modulus that plus that, and that's on the inside parentheses, and then that closes the outside parentheses, so I have to modular that as well. So what this is doing, yeah, that sounds right. What this is doing for us will, every time we get down to 0, if it gets down to -1, it should reset itself back to the remainder of the end index of the track list. So if it gets down to 0, it should pop back up to 2 and then go 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 2, rather than going to negative numbers or too high of a number. That's what that little guy's doing there for us. And what it needs to do is play that track. So function play track. And we need to play the track at the new index we just generated based on this button press of some kind. So there we go. And then play next track will be something similar. We have to get a new index, and that's going to be simpler. We can say state.currentTrackIndex +1, just straight up, modulus the length of our track list. So we can say state.tracks.length like that. And from there, we can lazily say, okay, that's going to be our new index. So if it goes 0 to 1 to 2, then it moduluses over it again. And you know how that trick works since you actually helped a student recently in the Context Clues lab. That's essentially the same trick here, except we're working on a button press rather than a for loop that just infinitely goes forward. So we need to play track based on that new index. And this is something that was really cool I figured out with this particular demo, or this particular code base, is we can actually return a massive object of information as the context for whatever we want to have happen. So what we can do from there is say, okay, I want to return the function play track. I want to return the ability to toggle play. I want to return the play previous track logic. I want to return the play next track logic. I want to return our track list as well. So I need to return track list as state.tracks like that. I also want to have our current track name. Nope. Current track name, we'll do that. And that will be our state.currentTrackIndex. As long as it's not null, we want it to return the state.currentTrackIndex. There we go. .name should be the name of our track. And from there, with that condition, we can say our isPlaying should be equal to state.isPlaying. So what this is doing for us is it's returning all of these helper functions. That way I can abstract the logic out of my player controls and abstract the logic out of my track list to make it a bit easier to see. So now I have one file called useMusicPlayer that will allow both my player controls and my track list to reference all these shared functions. So now we're sharing logic between two separate components, which is an issue in class-based components, but fairly simple in functional components. And I have one component maintaining all of my state, which is very useful as well. So from there, we should be able to use this music player as a kind of like custom hook, I guess you could call it, in the other components finally. So just looking at my notes here to make sure I'm not messing something up. Okay, yeah. So I have like general guide of where I'm supposed to go with this to make sure I have like notes. Is like, okay, do this, then do this, then do this. And then I'm going to put this in a code sandbox for you after this video so you can check it out as well. Matter of fact, that probably wouldn't be in this entire video, but it is what it is. Okay, so from there, let's go ahead and build out my track list, right? So new file, new file, we're going to call it tracklist.jsx. And I realize I forgot to call this one .jsx, but it should, let's just be safe. Now, because I actually changed an extension, this doesn't like that at all, so I'm actually going to clear and do a fresh npm start, which will open up my window here in a second, but that's fine. So from there, we need to do a few things where I import React from React. That's actually going to be an arrow function anyway, so we're going to do a React arrow function. There we go, called tracklist. And I need to bring in my music player, import useMusicPlayer from up one into utilities, and I want to use my useMusicPlayer helper function. I also want to bring in from FontAwesome. We're going to do from @FortAwesome, and I want my component. There we go, and we're going to import specifically FontAwesome icon, as you well know since you've done it before yourself. And the two I want, looking at FontAwesome's website, the two I want from, hold on. Maybe I can just guess what their names are rather than having to go to FontAwesome on my other monitor here. It's going to be obviously FortAwesome, and it's going to be from the free solid SVG icons. And the two I want are going to be FA Play. Yeah, and the other one I want is FA Pause. Okay, I figured those might be names for like traditional like music player stuff. So hell yeah. So what we're going to do now is pull in that information. So we're going to say const track list. We can probably do this via use music player call, which returns these informations, right? We're going to say a track list, our current track name. We also need to have the ability to play a track from our track list and also determine if it's playing or not via this Boolean. And then from there, here's where our magic's going to happen. Let me do my fragment tag, have our map happen here, and say from our track list, map through for each individual track and its index. We need to know that. I'm going to run an implicit return like so, And inside of here, let's go ahead and write our div. This div will need a key based on the index of the track. That's fine for this particular demo. It's going to need a class name from Bulma. It's going to have box, and the utility is flex to be a flex box container, which is why I like Bulma so much. It has really funny utility names like isButton primary, isFlex, and fun stuff like that. So from here, we're going to have a button with a class of, guess what, button. And this particular guy is going to generate a ternary. It's going to use a ternary of our current track name. If that's equal to the track name and is playing, is going to be what determines what renders here. So that's where we can render our font awesome icon based on 2 separate conditions. And there's our ternary. There. And that looks good. And that's where we load the icon play or pause, right? So the first one will be pause, so icon equals FA pause. Otherwise, it's going to be icon FA play on this guy. Cool. Then from there, we can build up a little bit further, and this button will need an on-click listener, won't it? So the on-click that's going to happen will be our good old buddy play track, right? So we're going to say on function press, it should play this track using its index position, since that was what the index call required. So below that, or to the right of that, since this is a flexbox container, we can have a div that displays the track.name like that. Now inside of my app, if I uncomment track list and I refresh the page, hopefully it works here. What am I missing? Oh, I forgot to wrap those 2 in one of those. There we go. That's what I forgot. Man, I'm on fire today, boy. Oh, okay. My goodness, all these freaking missing. Can't resolve component player controls and source. Well, I thought I had it. Oh, because I can't resolve because I don't have anything there yet. There we go. Oh, I need to actually move those containers to the other hand side. So we can do a couple different things. I'm just going to we can just add some direct styling to this guy instead of having to go to Bulma's website. I've used Bulma for a couple of things, but really not that extensively, so I unfortunately can't remember too much of their utility class names. So let's just do 1 rem on this guy, and we'll do a little bit of margin top since clearly the font wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay, that looks good to me. All right, so now that I have those going on there, it actually maintains the state of what I'm playing, and it actually turns them off, and I'll start actually playing the music in the background, potentially. Oh, yeah. And does this one play? Well, that's Africa, so no, that's something's wrong with that automatically. Good times right there, but that's okay. We're going to figure out what that issue was here in just a second. So with that all said and done, we can now come and actually build my track list as well. Tracklist.jsx. Oh, not my music player, sorry. Player controls .jsx. So this is going to be actually kind of similar to what we've just written. So it's going to be a React arrow functional component called player controls. It will also need to import the useMusic player custom hook we wrote for my utility file here. And it's also going to have the React awesome icons here, and we're going to be using some similar ones. I'm going to go ahead and import both these lines of code into players controls. And this one's going to need to have pause, play, and then it's going to have FA step backward and FA step forward. There we go. As my additional icon. So just like before, I'm going to say const destructured object from use music player function call should return some information for us. For example, is playing. It should respond with current track name, and it should also have toggle play, previous track. Nope. Previous play previous track, and then play next track. Should be everything I need to be returning to this guy here. So from there, we can build this little guy up a little bit stylistically wise. We can build a div with the class of box, which is really funny. And we can give it a thing of controls from Bulma. And I think we can do has background gray dark, I think, as a class name. Like I said, I should have looked at all this. I should have had a better game plan going forward, but it is what it is. Let's do current track. And then we can say has text light as a class name. I think has text light is what we need. And we can have a marquee down here. I should actually program all this stuff. I'm going to be lazy. I know React will fuss at me saying, you need some values for this guy. And then we're going to display our current track name inside of the marquee right there. So now that I actually have something exporting here, we can comment these guys in. I want to see what it ends up kind of looking like as I progress here. Okay, cool. That works. Although there's no current track playing, so there it is. I think I messed up something on Starlight Brigade because it sounds like Africa, and Africa also sounds like Africa. So clearly I messed up something in my context, right? Oh, yeah, I forgot to change the file name, didn't I? Starlight Brigade. That's what I forgot. There we go. I was like, oh, my index logic is off. Nope, I just made a typo. Okie dokie artichoke. So in our player controls, we now need to have another div of some kind that is, okay, yeah, so we have to have a div. This guy will need to be a flex box so we can have our buttons nicely spaced inside of it, so we can do a display flex. I'm going to do a justify content space around like that, and inside of here we're going to have each button for us here. So we're going to have a button with a class of button from Bulma, has text light like we had up above. That's why, because we're on a dark background, we're going to give these buttons a dark background as well. So has background gray dark, and that should be it for now. Cool. And inside of there, we're also going to be presenting our buttons. So that's where I'm going to have my font awesome icon. The icon will be, for this one, will be previous track, right? So FA step backward, like that. And this will have an on-click listener of some kind. It will have on-click. This will play my previous button after we play it. So we have to just reference play previous track as our function. Play previous track. And I don't want this. I want this to be disabled if we're currently on that track. So we can't really be like, okay. So if I want like that current track name is currently playing, then I want that button disabled. So I'm actually going to copy and paste this guy a few times because I want one for the middle for play. This is actually going to be FA step forward, right? That'll be my play forward. This will be play next track. Play next track. FA step forward, all the same class names. Yeah, that makes sense. This one will be FA play or pause depending on what's going on. So we can actually use the same thing where I might do something like render is playing Boolean like that, and we can render pause if it is playing. Otherwise, we can render play. And I think I copied too much, didn't I? Uh-oh. There. Nope. Copied too much. Okay, there we go. Okay, so, and this one will be our toggle play function that should fire, and it should also have the same style of disabled. And I think that's all we actually needed, right? Although it looks like the flexbox action didn't take place at all, so I wonder why that is. Should be display flex and justify content space around in this display flex box. So yeah, there you go. Don't know why the flexbox styling didn't kick on. It's the div that wraps all the buttons. Ooh, let's go. There you go. So now I can click and change the context. When I click this forward arrow, everything updates on state from the context player, and you'll notice like the pause button's also updating in the track list as well. So yeah, dude, it's a fun little app to build. I remember I had someone show this to me when I was a student. Rather, they did it using the old context API and class components, and I figured I'd show you something similar. So I was actually looking at their notes they left me when I was a student to see how they built it, and I tried to kind of convert it into hooks while we went through here. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you have any follow-up questions, always just let me know. I'll be happy to show you anything else that we can display our code here together. So later.